Welcome to this explainer. If you love discovering how monumental historical movements are forged, not in moments of quiet ease, but in periods of intense, unrelenting friction, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Today we're looking at the foundational months of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, zooming in on 1829 to 1830. This was an era completely defined by immense pushback, both internal and external. It was, in every sense of the word, a crucible. Okay, let's dive into this and see exactly how these early, extreme challenges actually forged the structural resilience of this entire movement.
So, here is our roadmap through a seriously dense, rapid period of history. We're going to cover 1. Publishing the sacred text. 2. Organizing the new church. 3. Miracles, mobs, and trials. 4. The first missionaries. And finally, 5. Establishing common consent. We'll be moving right from the physical printing of the book to the structural creation and the ultimate expansion of the movement.
Section 1. Publishing the sacred text. According to historical records, the very first major hurdle was simply getting this massive 590-page manuscript printed.
Now that hurdle wasn't theological. It was deeply, frustratingly practical. Joseph Smith needed to get this book published and spread far and wide. But doing that in the 1820s? Enormous task. After being turned down, Joseph and his friend Martin Harris finally found a local Palmyra printer, Egbert Grandin, who was willing to take on this massive 7-month project to print 5,000 copies. But there was a catch. Grandin demanded a staggering $3,000 up front. Back then, that was a mountain of cash. For Joseph Smith's impoverished farming family, this was an absolute financial impossibility. They literally just didn't have the means.
The only person in Joseph's circle with that kind of wealth was Martin Harris, who owned one of the absolute best farms in the area. But handing over that money meant risking the wealth he'd spent a lifetime building. Right at this moment of hesitation, Joseph reported receiving a revelation directing his wealthy friend to mortgage his farm to pay for the printing. So the crucial point is the intense personal sacrifice required here at the very beginning. The text explicitly commanded Harris not to covet his own property, but to impart it freely. And knowing his neighbors would mock him, Harris obeyed and mortgaged his best farm to guarantee the payment.
But the friction didn't just magically stop once the printing began. Oh no. That winter, a former judge named Abner Cole started working at night in Grandin's print shop. Because he had access to the printed but unbound pages of the Book of Mormon, Cole just started pirating the text. He published excerpts alongside his own sarcastic, mocking commentary in his local newspaper, The Reflector. This all led to an incredibly tense nighttime standoff at the print shop when Joseph's brother Hiram and Oliver Cowdery walked in and discovered what was happening.
When word reached Joseph down in Harmony, Pennsylvania, he headed right back to Palmyra. He walks into the printing office, finds Cole casually reading his own newspaper, and just calmly confronts him. The historical record notes that Joseph firmly told Mr. Cole that the copyright of the Book of Mormon belonged to him, and he explicitly forbade Cole from meddling with it any further. Well, Cole's reaction was explosive. He literally throws off his coat, pushes up his sleeves, pounds his fists together, and challenges Joseph to a physical fight right then and there in the print shop. This mini-narrative perfectly captures the friction of the era. Joseph, though, he doesn't take the bait. He smiles, tells Cole to keep his coat on because it was freezing, and calmly threatens legal action instead. Knowing he was dead wrong on copyright law, Cole backed down and finally stopped printing the excerpts.
Part 2. Organizing the new church. We're moving to April 6, 1830.
So, with the sacred text finally published and bound by March 1830, the next step was to formally establish the movement. Around 40 people crowded into the small Whitmer family log cabin in Fayette, New York, to legally incorporate the church. And this brilliantly illustrates how structured the organization was right out of the gate. To meet New York's legal requirements, it was a remarkably methodical meeting. First, they asked the congregation to sustain them as leaders. Second, Joseph and Oliver Cowdery ordained each other as elders. Third, they administered the bread and wine of the sacrament. And fourth, they confirmed previously baptized individuals as members. So, highly procedural from hour one.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because from that quiet cabin, the movement launched outward at an astonishing pace. Look at this rapid sequence of events. Organized on April 6th, by April 11th, Oliver Cowdery's already delivering the church's first public discourse to a large crowd. Fast forward to June 9th, and they hold their very first church conference, handing out licenses to brethren authorizing them to represent the church. The momentum here over just a few weeks was incredible.
Part 3. Miracles, Mobs, and Trials. We really have to contrast the sacred, structured quiet of that April 6th meeting with the chaotic, physical opposition that immediately followed in surrounding towns. In late June, Joseph and some others traveled to Colesville, New York to perform baptisms. On a Saturday, they built a dam across a stream to create a baptismal pool. Well, that very night, a mob tore the dam completely down. After rebuilding it the next day and pushing through the baptisms while crowds openly mocked them, Joseph Smith was arrested. He was dragged to court, kept all day without food, and forced to travel 15 miles to face trial as a disorderly person.
The courtroom scene that followed was straight out of a drama. You've got this hostile prosecutor, Mr. Seymour, who was eager to publicly humiliate the movement. He calls Newell Knight to the stand. Knight was a close friend of Joseph's who had previously experienced what was described as an exorcism performed by Joseph. Seymour aggressively questions Knight, mocking the whole event, and demands to know what the devil actually looked like when it was cast out.
But Knight's clever retort completely shifted the energy in the room. He looks right at the prosecutor and says, "It would be of no use to describe it because it was a spiritual sight, and since the prosecutor didn't understand the things of the spirit, he wouldn't understand the description anyway." The audience erupted in laughter, the lawyer dropped his head in embarrassment, and two unofficial, untrained defenders won Joseph and acquittal. It's just a fascinating look at how these early believers defended their faith in a highly hostile public square.
Part 4. The First Missionaries.
While Joseph was tied up fighting legal battles, the early grassroots missionary efforts were already taking off, spreading this printed book across state lines. Take Joseph's younger brother, Samuel Smith. He took these exhausting summer trips into neighboring counties just to sell the book. He was constantly rejected, deeply discouraged. But he leaves a copy with a woman whose brother-in-law bought it, who then passed it to Brigham Young, who passed it to family members connected to Heber C. Kimball. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. Samuel's seemingly failed efforts of leaving books with random strangers directly led to the conversion of the men who would become the foundational leaders of the church for the rest of the century.
Part 5. Establishing Common Consent.
We've reached the final crucible, the internal growing pains of a brand new organization trying to establish its hierarchy and rules. As the church grew, they hit a shocking moment of internal friction. Oliver Cowdery, the second elder of the church and Joseph's primary scribe, wrote a letter to Joseph saying he'd found an error in a newly written revelation. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just a critique. Cowdery outright commanded Joseph Smith in the name of God to erase the words to avoid priestcraft. Joseph had to firmly write back, questioning by what authority Cowdery thought he could alter a commandment from God, and eventually convinced Oliver that he was out of line.
But a much larger test of authority was brewing. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer clash of authorities happening here. Hiram Page, a member of the church, had a stone through which he claimed to be receiving his own revelations for the church, and many members, even Oliver Cowdery, were buying into it. Joseph insisted this went entirely against the order of the church. So, at the September 1830 conference, they tackled this head-on. The conference resolved that Hiram Page's revelations were false, officially cementing the doctrine that only the president of the church receives revelation for the whole church.
And how did they resolve it? Through a vital principle called common consent. This is the practice of conducting church business by collective agreement and sustaining votes. The members voted collectively to accept Joseph's authority and reject Page's. And this is so relevant because it still operates today. Modern Latter-day Saints continue to conduct church business by common consent in their local and general meetings, ensuring the congregation actively sustains its leadership, a practice literally forged in the fires of these 1830 disputes.
Which brings us to our final thought. We've seen a printer demand impossible sums of money. Mobs destroy baptismal dams. Hostile prosecutors mock beliefs in open court. And internal leaders challenge the founding prophet. Yet, every single point of friction forced the church to clarify its laws, formalize its authority, and activate its members. So, I'll leave you with this. How do the crucibles of extreme opposition actually shape the structural longevity of a movement? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this deep dive leaves you with plenty to think about.